He's the newly appointed chair of the Water Development Board in Austin. He was appointed by Governor Perry in September 1, 2013, and his term will go through February 1st of 2017. Carlos served on the Commission for the Texas on Environmental Quality from 2009 to 2013. He's the Texas representative on the Western States Water Council, the Board of Governors Conference Sustainable Development Work Table, the Governmental Advisory Committee, which advises EPA on environmental issues concerning NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement on Environmental Cooperation, and he also is on the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. Rubenstein was a former member of the Texas Environmental Flows Advisory Group, the Good Neighbor Environmental Board, and the Independent Federal Advisory Committee, Assistant President in Congress on Environmental Infrastructure Needs along the U.S. border with Mexico. He's also served as Deputy Director of the TCEQ as Rio Grande Water Master. In his past, he's represented the Water Council and also was a city manager for Brownsville. Join me in welcoming Carlos Rubenstein.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be in Amarillo to talk to you about what we're doing at the Water Development Board and Water Night. And I promise you, he talked about the things that I've been able to serve on giving advice to EPA. It's more like arguing with EPA, and I think we all would agree with that. You've all asked me to come up and talk about where we are in implementing House Bill 4 upon passage of Prop 6. What is it going to mean for the different parts of Texas? How are we going to be working with the different parts of Texas? Walking in, I had the pleasure of visiting Representative Price and also Representative Larson. Thank you all. It's great to talk to you, and always on water issues. As we were going across the state, leading up to the election on November 5th for Prop 6, and then certainly afterwards, everybody wanting to know, so now what? There's a couple of issues that have come up that I'd like to address as well. First is, why, for people that even still today don't understand how critical our water needs are going to be in the future, recounting what it is that we're facing is always important. So we start out by telling folks that Texas continues to have an explosive population growth. 50 years ago in 1960, Texas had about 9.6 million people. Today we're right around 26 million. In 50 years from now, there's going to be 82% more Texans living in Texas. And with that will obviously come increased demands for water, food, and all the things that we're used to. And it also comes the ability to maintain the Texas economy as well. So it's critical that we continue to address those demands as well. We know a couple of other things that are going to happen in the next 50 years. We know that relative to our water supply, we will have, even if we did nothing to implement the water management strategies, we're going to end up having about 10% less water available in 2060. People ask, well, how's that possible? Well, we all understand that being water people, you build a reservoir, start silting up, you lose that capacity. Pump water out of the ground, and you're going to lose some of that capacity as well. And so it's important that people understand where we are. There's some folks in other parts of the state, certainly here in the Panhandle, we all are keenly aware of the fact that the drought is continuing to persist, and it hasn't let go of this part of the state. But in other parts of the state, you still get that premise that 2011 was very, very dry. Driest year on record for Texas, but it rained. So is the problem over? And we need to keep reminding people that no, look at the pressures that we're going to be continuing to have in Texas with growth and the need for water. And yes, 2013 in certain parts of Texas maybe was a little bit wetter than we had in 2012 or 2011, but our reservoirs, for example, have not recovered. Across Texas today, our reservoirs should be at about 82%. And while we welcome in those parts of the state that the rain has returned, the reservoirs have not responded. Many of the reservoirs are still in their 30%. We all know where the reservoirs in this part of the state are at, 2 to 4%. So we're not seeing that change yet. In fact, across the state, if you total out where all the reservoirs are, we're somewhere between 62 and 64%. In normal times, we should be at around 82%. So clearly, we have a lot of work to continue to do. We are still cognizant of the fact that as bad as the 2011 map looked, where almost every part of Texas was in exceptional drought conditions, 52% of the state today still remains in some drought stage as well. So we need to address that. Moving forward, let's talk a little bit about what's in House Bill 4, what is it that we're implementing, the timelines that are associated with that, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and how, more important for me, is how is it that you all can continue to be part of that critical process, particularly in this year, which is so critical in the development of all of the steps that we need to put in place. So let's talk about a couple of the deliverables out of House Bill 4. House Bill 4 states clearly that upon the election being held on November 5th, if Proposition 6 passed, there were a couple of timelines that came into play. The very first one was in a very short timeline. November 5th election, Prop 6 passed by 73%. By December 1st, a couple of weeks later, we had to, working with all of the regional water planning groups, the heads of the regional water planning groups, we had to work up a uniform set of standards that each of the 16 regional planning groups are going to use to prioritize their respective projects in their regional plan. That's a very short timeline in which to do that, and that is a critical deliverable. What we're after in those uniform set of standards is the ability for any one of us to pick up the projects that are in any plan, apply the standards, and we should roughly come out with the same prioritization list as well. I'm happy to report to you that, actually we didn't wait until November 5th to start that process. We actually started that process in September. And I'm glad we did because it's so critical. We just assume, let's just think in terms of, if it does pass, let's do everything that we can to get this as complete and as accurate as we can get it. So working very diligently, and we all have a lot of thanks to give to the heads of the 16 regional planning groups. We worked through that process, and I'm happy to report to you that that group finished their task and they finished it early. The board adopted those uniform set of standards the first week in December. And look, we all know that now that we're about the business of applying the standards, we may have to go revisit them. We may get some unintended consequences, but that's okay. That's what those processes are for. A couple of other deliverables that are also in play right now. The 16 regional planning groups today are about the business of applying those standards and actually prioritizing their projects. That work has to be completed by June of this year. By June of this year, each one of the 16 regional groups has to turn over to the board their prioritized list in draft format. We will give some feedback on that list. That list will become final in September of this year. It is final for the projects that are identified in the 2012 plan. So that obviously generates a couple of questions. Why is that so critical? Well, it's critical because the $2 billion that y'all voted on approving moving over from the rainy day fund over to the SWIFT, State Water Protection Fund from Texas, the only things that we can lend money to are projects that are identified in the state water plan. So if we have a great idea, if we have a great concept, and we have a great project on developing water, conserving water, allowing us to use our water in a better way, it has to be identified in that plan. Well, we're getting the obvious questions. The last plan that the board adopted was in 2012. Things change. There are certain pressures that occur in certain parts of the state that maybe were not as evident when we finalized the 2012 plan. There's some ideas that have come to the forefront. There's some new technology. Can the plan be amended so that we don't miss out on this first round of prioritization to move those projects forward? The answer is absolutely yes. There is a process to go through, and I promise you that us at the board are going to do everything that we can to expedite an area's desire to amend their plan as they work through this prioritization process. But that cannot happen by coming to the board. That has to happen by somebody that has that interest going to their regional water planning group and starting that process. So to the extent that you are concerned about a project or a process or a water management strategy that you want to make sure doesn't get left out in this prioritization cycle the first time around, the best advice I can give you is attend the regional water planning group meetings, particularly in the next 60 to 90 days. Make sure that your concerns are expressed, walk away with a feeling that they have been heard or that you need to do some additional work there, so that when we get that list in June, it's as inclusive as it can be for us to consider. The regional planning groups are, in accordance to the statute, are prioritizing their list based on decade of need. When does a project need to come online? Cost effectiveness, sustainability, feasibility, and viability of the project. And here's what we also expect may occur. You know, we talked about the population growth that we're going to have in the next 50 years. We talked about 82% more Texans and what it would occur if we did nothing to implement those strategies, the demands that would be there, the shortage that we would all be facing in Texas in 2060. Here's where we stand. If we fail to implement these strategies in 2060, it happens to be a drought year. Texas will be short of water 8.3 million acre feet. When you talk to water people understand what 8.3 million acre feet is. Some other folks that we go around the state and we talk to say, well, is that a lot of water? Well, yeah, it's a lot of water, particularly if you put it in context of what we had to consume, the consumption rate that we had in 2011. We all, again, remember 2011, driest year on record, right? High demand for water. That year, Texans in total used 18 million acre feet of water. If we're going to be short 8.3 million in 2060, and we used 18 million total in 2011, that speaks to the complexity and also speaks to the reason why we need to move this as fast as we can. So we're continuing to work with the regional planning groups in those efforts. But let's say that as we continue to go through that process, you're not ready to yet move a project into the plan. You want to know when can you make sure that your project is considered for prioritization and possible funding out of SWIFT. We're not far from that either. You know, the state water plan needs to be revisited every 5 years. Every 5 years we get to revisit what has changed in Texas. What are the things that we want to make sure are captured in the next plan? So to the extent that there's something that you want to make sure is captured in the 2012 plan, work through that process right now. Don't let June come and let that process have gone through and your project not yet been considered. But to the extent that that occurs, remember, we're a year out from having to work on the 2016 plan, and let's make sure that we capture there. The next questions that we're getting is, so what's going to happen after that, and how quickly is the Water Development Board going to be cutting checks, and what kind of incentives are there? What are the benefits that can come because of the utilization of the SWIFT? Another question that we also got is, why is the $2 billion so important in 2013 if in 2011 the Water Development Board was granted authorization to issue $6 billion worth of bonds in an evergreen green authority? Well, you cannot add those two together. They are going to work in a cooperative manner, but they're really different things. The $6 billion authority we are going to use, we probably are going to start utilizing that in about 15 months. So people ask, well, if you had that authority since 2011, how come you haven't touched it? Answer simple, we hadn't touched it because we had a 2001 authority that we're still exhausting. 2011 authority is critical for our water needs in the state of Texas because the legislature made that authority an evergreen authority. So as we lend out money from the 2011 $6 billion and we get those repayments back, we'll be able to relend it perpetually in an evergreen nature. And that is critical for meeting our water needs. But that in itself doesn't move projects forward. I think folks were looking about how is it that we can incentivize the development of water projects and actually now start putting those projects in place that are called for in the state water plan in a cost-effective manner. And how can we do that by reducing as much as we can the user rate shock that will come from putting projects in place. The reality is, as we all continue to use water, user rates are going to go up. And whatever we can do to incentivize the development of those projects would reduce that rate shock are things that we should be looking at. House Bill 4 has a tremendous amount of enhanced funding mechanisms built in that we believe will help us incentivize this these type of utilities. Let's go over a couple. The state of Texas gets to borrow at a preferential rate. We have a AAA credit rating. The country wishes it had a AAA credit rating. We happen to have it. So immediately, if you come to the board, you get to borrow money at what we borrow, a AAA credit. But in particular, if you're an entity that, some entities already have AAA credits, but some of them don't. If you come to the board to borrow money when we implement SWIFT, and you don't have a AAA credit rating, there's a huge benefit to you already. One of the things that we've been talking to our staff is how can we articulate this? How can we get people to see that incentive as well? And so when we came up with this to help explain it, you come to the board and let's say you have a good credit, AA. Not exactly AAA, but AA is still pretty good. What is the difference in the credit rating and how is that going to help you move your project forward at a lower cost? Immediately if you come to the board and you borrow against our AAA, you're going to get today, in today's market, about 141 basis point reduction in what otherwise you would have had to pay. So let's say your project is $5 million, you're going to fund it for 20 years. How much money are you going to save if you came through the board for this process alone? Almost $900,000. That can make a difference in the type of project you're going to move forward, right? But it doesn't just stop there. House Bill 4 also allows us to look at incentivizing the movement of these projects by reducing the interest rate we would charge to whoever comes to the board for this money. So today, if we go to the market and we borrow at 4%, under SWIFT, we'll be able to lend money out at up to a 50% reduction in rate at 2%. Well, that's a huge cost savings as well, and all of us can benefit from that. But House Bill 4 didn't stop there. House Bill 4 also allows us to, because sometimes you look at projects and you need this much capacity right now, but to build a project in an economic way, for it to make sense, it really needs to be built at this capacity. It allows the state to participate in that added capacity that is needed for the economic nature of the project, but isn't needed now. And through time, as that area develops and they start accessing that capacity, they can buy that back from the state. That is a critical aspect of the state participation that's built into House Bill 4 that we also think will work. And then the last one is, as for example, municipalities come to the board and they're developing a water project, and they're going to pledge revenue from that project to pay back the loan. Well, you know and I know that when you're building out the project, you're not making any money, right? And if you have a note that you've got to pay on, well, that's an added burden. House Bill 4 allows us to defer those payments until that revenue aspect starts coming in. So we think that all those things will be very, very helpful in incentivizing the development of the projects. But again, I need to repeat, none of that can happen if the project isn't already identified or can get identified in the state water plan. And I urge you all to work towards that effort. Here's a couple of other things that also come out in the discussions that we've had across the state. We need 8.3 million acre feet of water in the next 50 years. Where's it going to come from? Do we have a magic bullet? Is there one thing that we should concentrate on? The reality is there is no magic bullet when it comes to answering the water needs of Texas. We're going to need a myriad of projects moving forward to be able to get to that 8.3 million. But just to simplify things, 8.3 million, about a third of it in the state water plan is called for coming from conservation and reuse. I was in Conroe yesterday talking about the same issue, and the reporter asked me if I had a distinction, if I saw a distinction between conservation and reuse. Carol and I were talking about that, and she chuckled about as much as I did on that question. Absolutely, there is a huge difference between conservation and reuse. Both of us using water in a little bit better way, but we need to be looking at both of those aspects. So again, a third of the 8.3 million acre feet that we need, conservation and reuse. A third of it will come, or has to come, from using water that we already have today in a better way. And that includes moving water from where it is to where it isn't. Lots of investment there. So when you look at the pie, those two, the cheapest water we'll ever get is conserving the water we already have, right? The other one's a little bit more expensive, but we still not have 8.3 million acre feet. How are we going to get that last third? That last third has to come from new water sources. And that is when we start the discussion about new reservoirs. You heard that discussion earlier today. Brackish groundwater desalination. Brackish groundwater desalination coupled with maybe peaker plants for electricity generation and then the storage of the treated water and aquifer storage and recovery. We're going to have to be looking at all aspects of it as well, including seawater desal that we're going to be looking for. Here's a couple of other sobering thoughts. You know, I go to Houston a couple of times and they ask me, well, this is Houston, how big is our problem? You know, they think that water problems in Texas are, you know, in other parts of the state. You know, certainly the Panhandle, we know how the drought has attacked this area here. You hear repeatedly in the press what's going on in Central Texas, but does Houston have a water issue? They do. That region alone, of the 8.3 million acre feet that we're going to be short, they're 1.2 million of that. And so they're having to move those projects forward. And they're starting to understand those processes. But again, let's put it in economic terms. What would happen if House Bill 4 hadn't passed, or Prop 6 hadn't passed, and we didn't start the effort to move these projects forward? 2016 comes around, the economic impact to Texas, $115 billion. 1.1 million Texans without a job. 1.4 million Texans would have to leave the state. Those are sobering statistics, and they all talk about the aspect of how important it is that we develop these projects. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the board to move the process forward. As the regional planning groups are developing their prioritized list, under the statute, we're required to develop rules to implement how we're going to utilize the fund, what kind of application process we're going to put in place, and how we're going to prioritize the projects that come to us for funding. I already talked about the criteria that the regional planning groups have to utilize. The criteria that the board has to utilize is different under the statute. Certainly, we're going to look at where that project came out from the regional planning group perspective. We're also going to be looking at, of that water shortage that is represented in that given region, how much is this specific project actually going to addressing that demand? Okay? That's critical. How much of the project is going to apply to a diverse, large population mix as well? Rural Texas, municipal Texas as well. We need to look at those aspects. The ability to repay back the loan. The ability for us to partner with you all in moving these projects forward. We cannot lend any money out of SWIFT until the rules are in place. The statute requires that the rules be in place no later than March of next year. I promise you, we have no interest in the board in waiting till March to finalize the rules. We have set about a very aggressive schedule to get the rules approved, and if everything works out the way we intended to, we'll be proposing our rule in July, more or less, with the intent of adopting the rule by December of this year so we can go about the business of making these projects happen. You all are critical in that rule process in many ways. People have asked, what's the transparency going to be? We've done a lot of work to make sure that we have the right type of outreach so that we invite the concerns that people will have. How are you going to address rural Texas concerns? How are you going to address agricultural concerns in the rural? What kind of process am I going to go through? If I'm in a region that a lot of our projects have been classified in that county other category, how can we actually develop projects from there so that we can all score them? All of those things we want to address in the rule. In order for us to move that rule forward, we need your input. And we need it more particularly in the next 90 days. So if you go to our website, there's already a process for you to comment electronically to us about what you want to see in that rule. What are your concerns you have? If you want to talk to us in person, 12 days from now, we're going to be down the road in Lubbock receiving public comment about the rule development. We're going to have staff hearings as well in Austin, 2 additional ones there, and then 1 additional one in Harlingen in March 24th. So Lubbock, February 24th, a couple more with staff in Austin, and then 1 in Harlingen. I promise you, as we travel the state, we keep getting more invitations to come and have hearings there as well. We will go about that process. We'll propose the rule around July. An official public comment period will begin. Please make sure you participate now, and you also participate during that process so that when we come to adopting the rule, that rule can be as complete as possible to satisfy the concerns that many of us will have and we'll make sure that they're addressed. I got a few minutes. I know we've been running a little bit short on time, but I want to see if there's any questions that you all would like me to address. One last point that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. There are 2 very specific and very important set-asides in House Bill 4. And both of them are enumerated in the statute in the same way. It directs the Water Development Board, and these are the words that are used, to undertake the utilization of not less than 20% of the fund for conservation and reuse. The other set aside reads almost the same way. Undertake the utilization of not less than 10% for rural and agricultural interests. When you read, undertake the utilization of not less than something, that is a hard floor, not a ceiling. And we all need to work together to identify those projects that we can move to those set-asides that are there so that we can move those forward. They're there for a reason. Let's all work together and take advantage of it. I'll close with that. I'll be happy to entertain a few questions. Again, thanks for the invite. Pleasure to be here, and also hopefully see some of you all 12 days from now down in Lubbock. Yes, sir. I couldn't agree with you more. I'll tell you what some folks that are listening to those concerns as well as the concerns that we're getting here. When people are talking about conservation, the discussion is no longer about let's just reduce the per capita consumption. Okay? It isn't anymore just about let's put everyone on a 2-day-a-week watering. Because you know what happens? If that's my day, whether I need to water or not, guess what? I'm going to go water, right? So are we really conserving water? I think the discussion has now moved to, if we're going to talk about conservation, it needs to be about also a change in how we use that water. You know, so does it still make sense to plant St. Augustine grass? Exactly. So I hope you appreciate as much as I do that the discussion is actually moving that way, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you making that comment, because some of the comments that I hear as well, and I think people forget at times that having served as water master for the Rio Grande, you understand what it means for food production and working with farmers. So, but you still every now and then get a concern expressed about, well, if we want to conserve water, should it come more from agriculture? Well, two things. Last time I checked, all of us like eating. Right, so and farming has already done a great job of conserving, and they will continue to do that because it's all about the yield you're going to have, right? The other one is the realization that in Texas, 1 of every 7 Texans depends on agriculture. All of us depend on agriculture to eat. The economy, 1 of every 7. So it's critically important that we look at. So let's get our priorities right. And I think that that's basically what you're saying in your question, and I appreciate it. Any others? If not, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here and visit with you all. See you in 12 days.
Okay, we've come to the point where we're going to break into our afternoon sessions. The agriculture session will stay here in this room. The municipal and industrial session will go out those doors and down in the Regency room. And the general public will be down in straight south in the other side of the Regency room. So agriculture stay in here. Be sure to take your name tag whenever you go in there and get that little red deal out for our door prizes. We have door prizes in each one of the breakouts. This air compressor was given by Green Country equipment. If you see those guys, be sure to tell them thanks. So we'll move into our afternoon session.